Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have with me one of the startup disruptors of the ecosystem. Join me in welcoming the founder and CEO of India's fastest growing startup, Aadit Palicha of Zepto. Thank you so much, Aadit, for joining me. Absolutely delighted and insanely excited to be doing this with you.
I really appreciate the kind words, Shivraj, and honestly, happy to be here as well.
Great to hear that, Adit. But it's amazing what you've been able to establish with Zepto, considering that the customer delight of being able to not just imagine, but execute that a piece of grocery that you order can turn at your doorstep in under 10 minutes is possible at scale, right? So while we continue to dive deeper into how you make that possible, I'd like to start with your journey as well, which is, of course, unique in more ways than one, especially with the context that you've been able to take a lot of bold bets with conviction at an early stage as a young entrepreneur, right? So if you can walk us through what that means for you, taking bold bets with conviction, because so much of being an entrepreneur is believing in you, believing in things that the world may not, but executing it and then showing the world that you can. So if you can maybe give us a purview of how did you choose to, go after a market that most people counted off in a way that most people, again, continue to question at scale. And of course, personally, you made the decision of dropping out of one of the most prestigious institutions in perhaps the world, Stanford, at an age that most people can, again, find questionable. So with that context, if you can give us a brief of how all of that unfolded with the 0 to 1 of Zepto, that would be a great conversation starter.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a great place to start. Look, I think in terms of personal background, both my co-founder and I have had a fairly similar story. Both of us have been building from a fairly young age. So I think that that's been a common theme, I think, throughout us growing up, is that building things that we found interesting was always sort of where most of our time went into. And we spent a lot of time working on multiple projects together. I think for us, after having spent sort of years as kids trying to find a product that people would actually use, we realized that, going back there, it is actually insanely difficult to create a product that people would derive consistent value out of, right? And so we, initially, sort of 13, 14-year-olds, we were like, let's build a website, everybody will love it. Nobody used it. It was more of a gimmick than anything else. And over time, it took us a couple of years before we had a product or two that we found to be fairly successful, and we were able to scale that into a reasonable degree. But eventually, I think after a couple of years of doing that and having some small level of success in building out technology projects, we figured that we're getting a little bit better at identifying products that people derive value out of, and what sort of trends or metrics are important to actually having having a product that genuinely creates value. But more importantly, what we hadn't had an understanding of at the time was, how do you build sort of an organization around that, right? How do you build an Airbnb or an Amazon or a Flipkart, right? And so for us, we figured the best place in the world to go and learn that would be Silicon Valley in California. Somewhat low nuanced thought process, I guess, two 17-year-old kids from Mumbai, but we figured that that would be the best place in the world to go and learn that. So the two of us applied, computer science at Stanford. We were lucky enough to get in. And yeah, I think that was sort of what we were hoping to be the beginning of a journey there, where we could have, dived deeper into sort of that ecosystem. But when the pandemic hit, we found ourselves back in Mumbai, which is when we started experimenting with the grocery space. And to give you some context on why grocery, right? I think as two sort of bachelors at the time, living in sort of an apartment in Mumbai, the first wave of the pandemic was not particularly kind to us from a grocery perspective, right? We genuinely struggled, in less of like an inconvenience. Like at the time, it was not an inconvenience; it was more exasperation. And so, that topic dominated our mindset for a long time, which, especially after coming from markets like the US and even in the Middle East, where grocery products, at least at the time, was significantly more evolved, right? And the experience was orders of magnitude better, and for reasons that we didn't understand why, right? And so, we dived in and we said, look, this is something that multiple markets have seen. Multiple markets have seen scale. Why can't we experiment with something like this in India? So we tried delivering ourselves, and we ended up scaling that a little bit, like sort of an aggregator model with last mile attached to it, sort of like a Zomato, but for groceries, and that sort of model. And eventually, as we scale that, we sort of looked at the product market fit metrics and said, look, delivering in 45 minutes wasn't as compelling, especially in a market that has got like the kind of penetration of grocery stores is incredibly immense, right? So the product market fit that we were seeing was, fairly lukewarm, and on top of that, there are many other structural issues with an aggregator model, at least in the grocery space. And so that's when we sort of eventually looked at like retention data on different carts. We looked at NPS in different carts, frequency of usage in different carts, and we said, wow, there's a cohort of customers that are getting deliveries faster, and there's something pretty magical that happens to their retention rates and their frequency of usage. And that's when we sort of dived into that rabbit hole. So yeah, I think for us it was like the journey was, we always loved building technology products. We came from that background. When we found ourselves in Mumbai in the middle of the pandemic, grocery was sort of the problem that obviously slapped us and many people in the face at the time. And yeah, we said, look, there's a model that there's a model that's low friction in all parts of the world that we've been in. Why doesn't it exist in India? Yeah. And that's when we started experimenting with the grocery space, and eventually sort of what led us to this model, very transparently, is just sort of the metrics that we saw on product market fit. So yeah, that's been sort of the broad journey on how we've gotten here.
That's fabulous to hear, and that's amazing in more ways than one, because it seems very logical in nature. But a quick extension of that is, were there any reservations at any point in time, considering the age factor? I'm not going to use that phrase 19-year-old a lot, because I know that's been overused in the ecosystem now. But was there any, did you have to fight these reservations in your head? Was it ever societal nature? Because so many youngsters today fight this battle of when to start, right? So what would you like to perhaps express when it comes to when to start, when to time it right? Is it a factor more in terms of what you can't control, or is it just very organic in nature?
Yeah, look, I think that question to me is a little bit moot, right? I think when to think about, like, what age is the right age to start a business. I think if you sort of deep dive into how most great entrepreneurial stories start, right, they sort of largely start as side projects, which is exactly what this started off at, right? And so people that like building, have an interesting side project, and build it for no other intention, no sort of business motive, just because they feel like it's a cool idea that people might actually respond to, right? And I think that was the pure intention that Kaivalya and I had. We didn't set out to say we're going to try to create a large business and be sort of create technology entrepreneurs. That wasn't the intention, right? Obviously today today building an incredible business is an opportunity that's come to us, but back then it was just like we love building cool products. This is a cool product. And then eventually, when you have just sort of that pure product driven, customer driven mentality without sort of the pressure of trying to build a business, that's when you sort of are able to think a little bit more clearly on how to iterate, like, objectively. That most founders, like, what I've seen, and the fallacy that I also probably had a little bit earlier in life, is that most founders, especially first time founders, start with the fallacy that they know what customers want, right? And so they come in saying, this is what we're going to build. We're going to build it, and like the hard part is getting it shipped. Once it's shipped, people are going to love the product, right? That's sort of the fallacy that most first time founders, including myself, have gone through, right? I think when you look at it very objectively, where you say, hey, I just really want to build something that people actually care about, and I don't have this intention of being a Steve Jobs-esque character that can just sort of envision products and make something exciting. When you have that pure intention, you're in a position where you can very objectively and ruthlessly just iterate on your product based on what customers are telling you. And so we just went down that rabbit hole and said, here's an interesting product. And all of a sudden, when we started experimenting with the 10-minute delivery, the reactions that we were getting were just like to us, it seemed like 1 in a million, right? Especially after having gone through years of iterating when we were kids on looking for a product. What we saw is like, man, the retention rates here are unbelievable. Yeah. The kind of response rates we're seeing from customers are unbelievable. And what's the probability of getting into into a prestigious college, right? The probability of getting into a prestigious college is like what, 1%, 2%, 3%. The probability of finding deep product market fit is many orders of magnitude lower than that, right? So if you just look at it mathematically, right, it just makes sense. Like the probability of getting an opportunity like that in life versus going to a prestigious university, I think the former was honestly just more exciting to us, and that's how we evolved into it. But the intention was not so we start a business, we're so young. It was like, here's an exciting product, people love this, like, how do we get this to more and more people? And then it evolved into an exciting business. So yeah.
Got it. Yeah, no, what I'm hearing is the simplicity of not trying to complicate it, because if you look at all the gloomy things that come along with starting up and all of that, then it can seem like a mountain hill of a journey, and you can't possibly go after that from day one. That's almost like a consequence of building and generating the right value, which Zepto is doing. And so I think that's wonderful to hear. I mean, the simplicity is really dawning, and I hope everyone catches a bit of it. What I want to understand further, as you was alluding to earlier, right, the customer delight that you've been able to establish, because it's insane how something can come to your doorstep in under 10 minutes, like every time, almost surprising, right? The rage is there with every consumer, each age, everybody's using it now. But what we get to see is not what happens in the background, right? I'm guessing you have to run a very, very strong operational engine to make it possible. And I want to understand from you what that is. So if you can give us a very quick overview or thoughts as to what Zepto does to make the end experience possible on the background from 0 to 1, give us the processes to the extent that you can. I think that would be very helpful to just decode what this quick commerce model means to begin with.
Yeah, sure. So I think, look, the way the model works in a nutshell, right? If I try to oversimplify it, and for the purpose of this explanation, there are three broad steps, right? And like you alluded to, right, it very heavily relies on deep operating discipline. And I think that's sort of the less sexy, but the actual crux of this model is that even if you look at a marketplace model like a DoorDash in the US, right, which seems like a very intensive operating business, it is very intensive. But this model is 20 to 30 times more detail oriented and more complex, right? And now I don't say that with a lot of it's not easy, right? It's a very, very difficult business. And so, yeah, look, I think operating discipline is the crux of it. And to just boil down how we actually get 10-minute delivery done consistently, the three broad steps, right? So one is the actual pods that we have, right? So those pods, we work with partners, we work with local players to set up those pods, and we help them operate that. But more importantly than actually setting those up is guiding our partners on sort of where to position it, right? Because from a network design perspective, that's critical, right? So we look at dozens of different factors, everything from a Koramangala in Bangalore to a Dwarka in Delhi to a Bandra in Mumbai, right? So dozens of different factors, everything from geographic centricity, road patterns, traffic data. We look at real estate prices, last mile workforce availability. We even look at things like weather, right? If it's raining, how frequently does it rain? What roads end up getting flooded? How does my serviceability get impacted? So you take dozens of different factors, and then we've got a network design lead internally, right, that sort of compiles that, and we have built out two different algorithms on running different sort of average delivery time scenarios depending on where we position ourselves. The long and short of it is you have to figure out what's the best place to position myself to get maximum access to customers in under 10 minutes in this micro market. And so that network design becomes critical from a micro perspective. The second is the operating discipline that happens throughout an order, right? So from the time that you click the checkout button to the time that the groceries are packed, bagged, and dispatched, that entire task happens, for us at least today, in about 58 seconds on average, right? And so it's a combination of the software that we built out within the store, so the software that we built out within sort of within the broader network that we have, the pod network that we have, but also it has a lot to do with sort of the operating nuance, right? The way that you design your handover processes, the way that you design the like how you allocate last mile riders. Can we do it preemptively? Like what sort of do we have captive or not captive last mile basis? There's a lot of different elements that to actually get that pack to dispatch as seamless as possible. And so that's sort of the second step. And the third step is sort of controlling last mile radiuses, where you can keep average distances at a low, but also keep sort of the most efficient network on a macro level across the city, right? Where it's not too dense, it's not too sparse. So there's a lot of different ones. But to combine it, it's like the most optimal place to position yourself, along with the 58-second pack bag to dispatch time, and then sort of a control last mile radius, which is how you get to where we're at today, which is a median delivery time of 8 minutes and 24 seconds. So yeah.
That's incredible. I'm sure everyone listening is going to be mind blown, having understood what goes behind just the detail of making this possible. Because of course, there's so much happening. And to that point, I think as young tech entrepreneurs, what does it mean to go into a model which has such nuanced operational challenges, right? If you can perhaps allude, because I'm guessing the largest businesses and the startups of the world as well, right? Amazon at the core also has a very strong operational engine that we perhaps don't get to see very evidently, but get to experience almost always, right? So if you could perhaps give us a one-on-one on the operational nuance at a high level, perhaps that goes into it, what it goes into preparing yourself for such a thing as well, and then how do you execute it at scale?
Yeah.
That'd be very helpful, Adit.
No, I think it's a great question, and to sort of dive in, right? The and just like to give you the context on how as entrepreneurs we dive into that. I think Kaivalya and I, not to toot our own horns a little bit, but naturally, we do come with a high degree of detail orientation. I think most of the projects that we worked on are online to offline. For some, statistic reason, we've chosen low margin businesses, but that is the reality that we sort of left ourselves with. But on the on sort of how we actually get this done, right? In like from a company top down, the approach that we've taken is largely built into the team, right? And so we have a very different philosophy on building a team, right? We have a no generalist mentality, right? So we actually don't like. I mean, other than me, and unfortunately, I don't have any particular hard skills. The philosophy that we've largely taken is we want to get people that have seen this in some form or the other before, have built sort of scaled up businesses that resemble the space that we're in, right? And so if we need to get a finance team built out, let's say the best finance operative in the country, or one of the best finance operators in the country to build it, right? We don't want to we don't want to be in a position where we have to take bets on people that might scale, might not scale. If we need to build a supply chain, let's build like sort of the most optimized supply chain with people that have done it before at phenomenal companies like a Flipkart, or a Pepperfry, right? And so can we get the best supply chain executives on board? So if you look at the way that we've taken it, right, we've just taken it's very boring. It's a very sort of retail, like Lala mentality, where you just have like the experts just come in and get it done, and there are no sort of it's honestly not as exciting. There are no like figuring out sessions and deep brain brainstorming that end up getting done. It's actually just textbook, right? And so that's the mentality we have, right? Let's there's obviously there's innovation on top of it. That's a given. But the way I like to say it is that this model, the crazy thing about this business that is like very unique is the fact that we have to deliver in incredibly short periods of time, right? And the team figured that out in week one of the business. Everything else has already been done before, right? Building an HR, building a finance team, building a great product team, building out highly efficient fulfillment operations. Someone out there has already done like the ABC of it. We just had to do like the beginning element. So yeah, the mentality has been very specialist oriented, which is why I think we've had the kind of operating discipline that we do. Right, the reason why transparently in a very short period of time we've been able to consolidate capital is because like capital consolidates, especially in operating businesses, with teams that have the best discipline. And so for us, especially in a market like this, right, which is why we're actually very, very excited about the way the market is looking like right now. Yeah. Capital tends to consolidate with teams and with sort of like historical records of the best operating discipline, and that's frankly been just like the focus internally. So yeah.
Fair enough. No, I think that's particularly clear, and it's amazing how you talk about the not reinventing the wheel, right? It's just about bettering the wheel to make the best product and deliver the experience, as opposed to doing everything from scratch. I think the simplification there is also uncanny and amazing to witness. But there are two things that you alluded to, right? And this is something that you maintained as a narrative all throughout the Zepto journey, which is the reason why this succeeds is because you have a lot of focus and efficiency, and you have a world-class team. Talking about the latter as continuing the flow of thought, how do you, build out this team which you called as world class? You've often alluded to, let's say, one of the best operating teams in the country, perhaps, right? Talk to us more in depth of how do you look at, let's say, talent acquisition, retention, growth within the company, org design, whatnot, right? Whatever your building principles in terms of team building are, would be very helpful, because for a company like Zepto, which is not just hands-on, but is growing at an incredible pace, which is unprecedented in the ecosystem. Very few companies which are outliers have only been able to pull it off. How do you manage this constant evolution of team building? That'd be very helpful, Adit.
Sure. No, I think, and again, like it's like it's a great thing to be talking about, right? In terms of how to build a team, the philosophy again has been top down, right? So the very like simple one liner that I use when I talk about how we've built our team, a lot of startups and very successful startups, so different approaches that can work, but there are some great companies that have taken have started off with like the founders and like a few junior folks like interns, etc., that they eventually build on top of and build sort of a bottoms up structure. We've taken sort of the opposite, right? The viewpoint is that I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an expert in, let's say, finance or HR, right? That's not my core competency. So if I try to build a finance team bottom up, I will almost certainly get it wrong. Right? Just I can spend a lot of time speaking to great CFOs and some of the best startups in India, but it's a very low likelihood that I'll be able to sort of build the right structure of a finance team or an HR team myself bottoms up, right? With someone that might not be like a specialized expert in those fields. So why not start with a seasoned executive on day one that has done this before, that's built out teams, so that we have a first time right mentality, right? And that first time right mentality is important. I'll talk about it in the org design sense as well. But yeah, so I think that's like the philosophy that largely been top down on the talent acquisition side, which is odd, right? I think like a lot of companies in the early stages don't have the opportunity to sort of put together an executive team on day one, right? That tends to happen. Like executives start becoming more likely to come on board, when you have sort of a bit more traction on your belt. I think when initially when we were at very low traction, and obviously things have evolved fast, so life has been a little bit easier for us nowadays with executive hiring. But in the early days, with very limited scale, we were just in this interesting position where we could actually bring executives on board, and I don't think that has anything to do with the the sort of vigor with which I try to convince them. I think it's largely just to do with the fact that these folks were incredibly intelligent. They saw the promise behind the model, not just the magic behind getting a 10-minute delivery, but actually the underlying business sense that it made on a unit economics perspective, and that's why we were able to bring them on board. Right? So I think the model did most of the talking for me on that front. But yeah, so that's like the top-down philosophy. To just jump into the how we look at retention, how we look at org design, right? Like I mentioned, it's a first time right mentality, right? And so if you look at how companies scale, as they get bigger and bigger, like how most companies scale is they start at a certain point, they scale to a certain level, and like they haven't built processes to handle that scale, so they break for a little bit. There's like a bit of a flatline period where they sort of get the right executives, they start fixing things, and they're able to scale to the next level, then they break. They're able to scale to the next level, then they break. And it's just fine. It's a step-by-step approach. It takes years to build large companies. We're in a position where, if you want to win this market, we have to build a large company in a fraction of the time. Right? So the philosophy has always been, in that scale journey, can we preempt the breaking points like 2 months in advance, fix them so that it's just smooth. Like there's no interruptions, right? It just keeps going this way. So how do we just keep preempting the breaking points, right? And so the way we've done that, like that's how we've approached like an org design and retention perspective, right? We don't want to be in a position where we design a certain org and we had certain assumptions that like proved out to be disastrously long. We didn't get the right expertise on board to help us build it out. We didn't sort of think deeply about it. We didn't spend like a good 3-4 weeks on it, and then like 3 months later the org breaks because it isn't designed to handle a certain level of scale. Like we spent a lot of time just thinking through very strategically and very early on, like how should reporting structures work? How do we keep sort of like a comp ratio managed very early on, where we sort of don't just bring people on board with crazy compensations and then just try to fix it a couple of months down the line. How do we balance out like career trajectories for people, and like do we sort of like how do we keep people engaged in sort of a high intensity environment? So a lot of those problems that that traditionally sort of plague companies in a little bit more mature stage, like, oh, your comp and bend ratios are all messed up at like year 2, year 3. Now we got to fix it. We've tried to preempt that, right? So we don't want to be in a position in year 2 where we're like, oh man, this is messed up. I mean, you take 2 months off and just fix this. So that's been the mentality with org design, and I think similar on all the other fronts you mentioned, right? Talent acquisition, retention. And look, I think the archetype of talent that we have is sort of people that are like highly ambitious and like are willing to put a deep amount of input. Like, there's a lot of input that goes into it. There's a lot of intensity for sure, but like the output that we're getting right now is an order of magnitude higher, right? And so you have retention problems when there's a lot of input and there's not much output, or like vice versa, where there's just no input or no output, and in somewhat of a lull environment. So eventually we'll have to balance that, and we are balancing that. We're focusing on that aggressively, but yeah, like most of those problems we just try to preempt. If that that explanation makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful to hear. Instead of, waiting for a point in time to kind of, evolve into it, having that hyperscale mode and having that, process orientation from day one. At least that's my takeaway from it. And I love the prepared mind sort of a spectrum, right? You're prepared for that action and you're already thinking about that, the mindset of building, like, I don't know, they call it as $0 billion company, whatnot, right? You can use those phrases, but I think the ambition is clear, and the way you've been able to structure it is also extremely wonderful and almost, contagious for everyone listening in, and it's going to be very helpful. I think, moving forward, the other aspect is, of course, the focus and efficiency bit, which, of course, stems from building a great team, but having built the fundamentals, right? Getting a great group of people in one room, of course, I'm sure is not enough. How do you put the sense of, ensuring that you're not as a model A going out and doing a lot of things, because, a lot of the other players have been able to do that. And that's why they've been either late to the quick commerce market, or they haven't been able to deliver at the efficiency or scale at the efficiency that you have been able to, with, of course, all due respect and everyone trying to create great value. But what do you think has, worked for Zepto's favor in terms of the focus and efficiency bit? And how do you maintain that at a culture level, right, within everybody? Because I'm sure this has to stem within every spec of the org. So how do you make that possible? That would be great to hear.
No, it's a good question. I think, like you touched upon it in your in the way that it was asked, right? I think focus is the biggest boon that we have, right? If you look at sort of the history of the Indian ecosystem, vertical upstarts with great teams that are just purely focused on perfecting one model are the ones that usually have won, right? Like if you look at some of the winners that we have today, like Delivery, Rapido, exactly the same story. And even if you look at it globally, right, like DoorDash, etc. So it's usually the focused upstarts that tend to take the cake, especially if you sort of zoom out 5 years and 10 years down the line, because there are a lot of structural advantages to being like purely focused, right? And even if it's not evident at sort of year 1, year 2, when you compound it over 10 years or 15 years, which is essentially the game that everyone is playing, like 10, 15 years is honestly a short timeline. The advantages of being purely focused is incredibly important. In terms of like the way we look at efficiency, right? So going to the crux of the conversation, and for us, unit economics is an incredibly deep focus. And so we've actually gotten to a point where, especially with a company of this age, the kind of traction that we've seen on unit economics, with stores being profitable on every operating line item, like the most mature stores we have already hitting sort of those profitability potentials, are other the other pods that we have in sort of similar trajectories as well, right? That to us has been, again, like one of the reasons why we've been able to raise rounds in such quick succession is just largely because the micro markets we have are trending in that direction. And like the way that we've been able to do that is like a lot of basic things, right? Like, for example, data visibility. Like when you're building a business that's super intense, it's got like many different line items on a P&L that like maybe a software business might not have, right? One of the challenges, the challenges that even scale-up companies have today is like, how do I actually track this on a per order level? Like, how do I get that, how do I get that visibility to know if I'm making progress or not? That was the first thing that we focused on, right? And so can we just have rigorous visibility into every single line item of this business? And like, that's half our job. And then the next 50% is just optimizing it. And look, I think, we do have we have a track record of micro markets turning full operating profitable. And that's like sort of the playbook that we're repeating. But for the first, like the beginning of the business itself, we sort of took a P&L of a micro market that we said, we want to build a fast growing and profitable business in the end state. And so this is what our micro market needs to look like on a month-on-month basis. from a P&L perspective. And that's what we've been sort of driving very strict governance on internally, right? So that's how we drive governance on like unit economics. It's how we drive governance on like the overall growth trajectory of the business. But yeah, it's just like honestly, we found that like, bulletproof data visibility, like frequent and like strict governance on a set P&L for every micro market, and then extrapolating that is like 70-80% of the job. And then like the rest of the 20 to 30% is just like innovating on every line item, right? If I've got a last mile cost, how do I bring that down structurally, right? How do I sort of increase efficiency across the board? And it has to scale, right? I think what people don't tend to realize is that, if we sort of like do some regard and we're able to sort of reduce one line item for one micro market, how does that scale to 1 million orders a day, right? Like that's a deep focus area. And so yeah, I think like it's data visibility plus governance, which I think we've nailed. And then the last part, which is like innovating on the line item by line item, we've already sort of achieved that in some of our more mature micro markets. And the micro markets, as a result of that, as a result of the learnings that we've taken in the first 6-7 months of the business, are sort of like doing currently better than our more mature micro markets, and will hopefully continue on that trajectory. So that's very transparently the reason why we've been able to raise capital, right? And we've got very thoughtful investors on board. Like the last round was sort of led by Y Combinator Continuity, that's made like great investments in companies like Grow, ClearTax, like companies that have had tremendous success in the Indian ecosystem. Like those like high caliber, like thoughtful investors come on board cap tables that have got deep control of their business. And so for us, it's been a focus area on day one. And like, yeah, that's how we've approached it.
Got it. That's incredible to hear. I think just quickly continuing on that thought, and at the expense of maybe sounding repeatable, the fact that you've been able to, let's say, maintain focus and be efficient is also a factor of, let's say, the team size, the growth, and everything being lala, at least initially, right? But with time, processes can also get, let's say, become a bottleneck to innovation, as you mentioned, right? That can be, a perceived notion, if not a reality. So how do you perhaps tackle for that, or maybe prepare for that aspect? And how do you maintain this notion of remaining like, a small company versus a large company? Because, with large companies that tend to get things which are, let's say, comfortable, right? You tend to go strict. So how do you maintain that balance where everything remains, where value generation is at the core and you can continue to innovate at scale? That'd be very helpful to understand, Aadit.
Right. So if I'm understanding your question, it's along the lines, like just like, so the question you have is sort of along the lines of how we've maintained focus. I might have missed out of the question. The core of the question.
The primary aspect is around, how do you maintain this at scale, considering that when you grow this fast, it can tend to break or tend to become a bottleneck. The process that helped you get here can tend to become a bottleneck in terms of innovation or scale, whatnot.
No, so got it. Makes sense. So in terms of, so it's a good question. I think like most startups have an opposite trajectory where like they've got innovation that's taken them to a certain level, and then processes what take them to the next level, right? And so like the processes that they didn't have initially that led to their innovation end up being bottlenecked to their like scale and like a 10 to 100 journey, right? So most startups have that conundrum. I think it's an interesting question. Like, honestly, not something that we've encountered yet, where we see ourselves not being able to innovate right now. Like we just know exactly what we're doing. Like we know exactly what kind of business we're building. We know exactly the value proposition that we have. We know how like the market is massive, so we don't really need to do anything else to be able to sort of build a crazy large business. So most of the innovation is deeper into the vertical and less horizontal, right? If you understand what I'm saying. And so like, how can I get even more efficiency? How can I drive even more consistency in sort of customer experience? And so I think like maybe potentially with like a horizontal type innovation, which is what some companies might need. Like you're building a software company, you got an 80% gross margin, you might get to 50 million in revenue. And that's amazing. But how do you get to 500 million in revenue? It might not necessarily be the product that you've currently built out, right? And so now you've got to take a step back and innovate and build product number 2 and product number 3, and then get to 200, 300 million in revenue. But for us, it's less about that, right? Like I think growth, revenue, etc., is like the easier part. The harder part is just getting deeper and deeper into the into the vertical. So I think with sort of when you're business model, instead of sort of looking for exciting parallel business models, and it's an approach that we've adopted, and like I'm sure there are companies that might not need to adopt that approach that are in the space that are not in the space that can still be fairly successful. But when you're going deeper into your business model, the processes that you have tend to be like they tend to help you do that. They tend to sort of free up mind space to be able to do that, right? Because if you're operating on jugaad, right, like where you things are crazy and you're scaling and things are breaking, and you've got no processes, then you're always in sort of the here and now, right? You're always trying to fix what's currently going on. You're never able to sort of elevate from the 30% week on week growth. Like, that, like, how do you maintain that? Like, you're never able to elevate your thought process around that. And so, yeah, I think for us, the like processes enable that, like deeper vertical innovation. Maybe down the road, I'll be having a conversation with you saying, Jivraj, now the next challenge is how do we, expand horizontally, and how do we sort of break out of our 100 to 1,000 mindset, and how do we go back to a 0 to 1 mindset? Yeah, I think that could definitely be a conversation we have. I don't know right now where the phase of the business where it's necessary, but down the road it could be important, like how to keep innovation there at scale, and that sort of answers your second question as well, right? How do you sort of keep customer experience stable as you scale? The answer to that question is very simply just like process, right? And so just like being very process oriented has been like a boon for us so far. And look, maybe one day it'll come back to bite us, right? But I think back then, we'll hopefully be self-aware enough to be able to see that, and then sort of try to course correct. So right now it's working out well.
Fair enough. No, I think that's a lot of maturity there, and I understand that, considering that the business model in its sense is different, the focus areas are different, and you're trying to go more vertical as opposed to horizontal. That approach has worked out best, and it's amazing how that keeps giving on and on, right? But to that point, I mean, so when you're going in depth, right, and a lot of questions around, when are you going to be in more cities? How profitable can this get at scale when you're going to, the smaller towns and whatnot, right? That arises, right? So how are you fundamentally looking at the next 24 months, right? I'm sure like one thing the pandemic has taught us that nobody can perceive what's a 1 year, 2 year timeline. But what do you think, holds in store for you as you expand? What's the playbook going to be like? How do you think this is going to be sustainable? Also from a unit economics perspective, considering that, these models tend to, I wouldn't say break, but you'd be able to shed more light there. So
yeah. No, you're right. I think, and honestly, we're bearing the brunt of that market sentiment, which is, highly complex operating businesses in India have, in my opinion, there are a few that haven't been built with the right discipline needed for you to have control on that on a business as complex as that. And so you are seeing multiple different businesses, and you would know much better than I would. You are seeing multiple different businesses that are high operating intensity not fall apart, but like going through very challenging times at like a later stage in the business, at like a 4 billion or a 5 billion mark, when you get to like a large amount of scale. And then there are honestly no specific businesses that come to mind, but that's general sentiment, right? And so that like high intensity businesses haven't been built with the right rigor in the early years, right? And so that's pretty much what my entire sort of 16-hour workday looks like. Like how do I overcome that, right? And there are plenty of like examples of great companies that have gone like from that stage to 10 billion plus, and have really just achieved like operating rigor that hasn't led to sort of that fall apart in like not just customer experience, but just like efficiency metrics, right? And so for us, that's pretty much my entire day just boils down into how do we prevent that from happening. And like I mentioned, right, like simple things like visibility plus governance, and then sort of like going deeper into the business, that gives you a lot more control and confidence in the business. I think also, if you look at sort of where we're at today, right, just to give you some context, we're in a position where we've grown like 300% to 400% a month on average since launching in August. Today we're like still doubling to tripling every month at like a pretty significant scale. And yeah, I think it's been a crazy like 6-7 months. We're in a position where we want to 20x in the next 9 months as well, like the way that things are looking. And so Yeah, the thought process with that is not only are we going to achieve like an order of magnitude more scale than we're at today, which is a fairly significant scale. We also want to half our like the capital requirement that we need to do that, right? And so today if we're in a position where a lot of early micro markets have just launched, right? And so as micro markets get more and more mature, they start trending more and more toward operating profitability. That's like the trend that we've seen with all of our micro markets. That's sort of enabled us to have like to build investor confidence. The idea is to really drive governance on that trend of a micro market, and so that like when we 10x or 20x in revenue, right, we're able to half our burn simultaneously. And so that's the 12-month objective, right? And like I think look, that's why I'm honestly pretty psyched about this market. Right? I think markets like these reward that many more times over, and like a lot of the folks that aren't doing that would get wiped out in a market like this, which is exciting to me. And I think that's important. So yeah, that's like the high level objective. Yeah, I think and just in terms of how we're doing that, like I mentioned, like it's just visibility plus governance and like just overall operating discipline that we just focus on. So yeah, hopefully I don't think we'll be in that position very candidly. I think the ecosystem now, especially because like they've seen it happen multiple times before, the ecosystem now, investors have sort of learned what businesses like those look like in the early days. Right? And when you're growing so fast, sometimes it tends to be like a video game, right? Where it's just like you've got like this revenue number, right? And it's just going up, and you're like, wow, like every day you open your CEO dashboard and like it's up like a crazy percentage, and it's just a video game, right? It just keep going up and keep going up, and like there's a lot of like dopamine that starts hitting you, right? And so like it's actually a challenge in that frame of business to be thinking really commercially, right? Like as a business, which is it's not easy at all, right? And so a lot of investors have seen what businesses like that sort of video game mentality look like in early days. I honestly think like frankly the businesses that are being built today have like a lot of great businesses have been built and have been able to course correct. So I don't think it's like a humongous problem. I think that there are plenty of businesses that have like overpassed that have sort of skipped that phase and just continue to be like highly efficient operating companies. And there are companies that might not have gone past that, like might have hit that hitch, but I'm sure are going to get out of it. And I think the great founders and great teams behind it. These are very like minor problems in a 10-year, 20-year grand scheme of things. But I don't think we're on that trajectory. I'm trying to be in that category. So yeah.
No, I think that's wonderful to hear, and it's just that amazing. Like I think the fundamentals and discipline there is very, very evident, and it keeps giving. I think the numbers of growth are humongous, and they're not just coming at the expense of, as you mentioned, it's not a prayer for you. Growth is a process, and that's what I think keeps giving. So that's wonderful to hear, Adit. I think this entire line of thought has been amazing. I think we've covered a lot of how, what goes into building Zepto and uncovered the finer nuances that can help us dive deeper into how to build a business at that scale and speed. The way I would love to end this is, by diving a bit deeper into what your personal thought processes have been, how you've evolved, and what's gone into that journey of, as you lead a $500 million or whatnot, like without going into valuations, a company at this scale and stage. The first question there, as we conclude is, Adit, what do you think are some of the more finer nuances of your personal characteristics that you've had to mold, that you've had to evolve as the company has grown, as you become more mature in the journey, and as more consumers, millions of them across the country, have become dependent on something like a Zepto to keep delivering the insane experience that it does? What has it done to you when, so much responsibility comes in, so much scale comes in, the organization gets built in, and this becomes something that you pursue for the foreseeable future of your life? What does that do to you personally in terms of maybe qualitative skills, and also maybe the mindset and maybe the tangible things that you can help us decode as, everybody listening in?
Yeah, I think, again, like a wonderful question. I mean, to deep dive into it, I think in sort of touching upon the earlier question that you had, which is like, Aadit, you're so young, etc. Like, there's, wow, like what led you to take this sort of decision? I think, for when I think I speak for Kaivalya here as well. The most exciting thing about this business was not the fact that the business was doubling or tripling every month. That becomes it, like you mentioned, becomes a process, not a prayer at a certain point. And like it was less exciting. Like that was not what really sort of like viscerally led Kaivalya and I to sort of like not finish college, right? Because I think like in terms of like the monetary aspect, right? I think you can build great businesses here, you can build businesses in California. We found we honestly loved the idea of coming back to our home country and building, but it was less about the monetary aspect, right? I think like at a certain point, it doesn't really matter. For us, what was more exciting was the fact that we could feel ourselves becoming significantly smarter uh, very quickly, and not because we were just like very smart, because we had actually just got into this very special environment where you've got a team of people around you, like seasoned executives that have got decades of experience, that have got like tons of like they're much smarter than I am, or Kaivalya is, right? And you're able to learn from, and you're able to do that in sort of the vantage point that we have. You're able to learn about every different aspect of the business, right? So like the reason why the CEO might have to be a generalist is because like if I get a supply chain or a CEO, he might not know anything about marketing, or if I get a marketing CEO, he might not know anything about supply chain, or someone who's a specialist in that being a CEO might not work out as well. And so like being in this position where you're surrounded by people that are much smarter than you are, and you're in a business that's clearly working like incredibly well, and like you have like all of your interests, all of your time is aligned to like scaling as fast as the business, and like being in a position where you can see that entire journey from start to finish. So you really want to be smarter. You're surrounded by people that are much smarter than you are. It ends up just like kicking into this magical environment where you feel yourself like just gaining a lot more gaining a lot more insight, self-awareness, and just like perspective that probably would have taken years to build. So that was the most exciting thing about it. So you could, the very crude way of saying it is we could feel ourselves getting smarter, right? What I'd say is that we're 2 weeks from now we were probably a lot less smart than we are when we were today, and 2 weeks after this conversation we'll probably be a lot smarter as well on multiple different things. There's still a this is a very long way to go, but yeah, I think that's like sort of the journey of personally scaling as founders of what will hopefully be sort of an insanely large business over the next couple of months and years. But yeah, I think like personally the characteristics that have mattered the most, it's largely been work ethic, like work ethic, being disciplined about being disciplined and holding yourself to a high degree of gravitas as like more and more people become like dependent on the vision of your vision of the company. Those have been two very interesting things, right? So like just like solidifying a set work ethic, having discipline built around that, and also just like holding. It's very difficult for Kaivalya and I to take ourselves seriously, very honestly, right? And it's not something that comes naturally to us. Like okay, we're CEO of a $600 million company. It's difficult to take yourself seriously, but then you holding yourself with that gravitas is important when you've got people people that are coming on board for your vision. And so that's been an interesting like qualitative characteristic that we had to work on in the early days, and it's paying dividends today. And so yeah, I think that's the broader thought process on that question.
Got it. No, I love that one line summary of, becoming smarter every day, and, just like how the time condenses to that journey. So I think that's a very unique perspective to the founder journey and founder scaling. But, continuing on that thought is the next aspect of, like, I'm sure all of these experiences are also first time experiences for you, right? So you're almost figuring out with every day, with every new minute, whatnot, right? And when you're on a roller coaster, it can tend to get, of course, bumpy, I'm sure, right? So if you had to maybe give us a quick caveat of how you do this in terms of, being comfortable with being uncomfortable every new day, or being comfortable with just figuring new things out every day, what does that mindset require, and how do you enable that in action, in practicality? I think that'd be wonderful to hear, just out of a lot of curiosity.
Got it. Just like again, like just like repeating the core of the question, you want to talk about
how do you make yourself comfortable with being uncomfortable, basically, if I were to sum it up.
Yeah, yeah. I like, yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. I think that's like, again, not to like not to come off as sort of a like like an overly wise person, but the I think that's sort of one of the characteristics that I feel Keval and I naturally had. Like we were uh, generally very paranoid about being comfortable in life, right? And I think
Nice.
the place that we were in life at the time, right before we started experimenting with products in Mumbai, we were in a very comfortable place. We had the opportunity to get a degree from like a phenomenal, phenomenal institution.
Yeah.
That is honestly just like to me at least, it was like paradise on earth, right? It's a phenomenal
Yeah.
place. Everyone there is so much smarter than you are, and it's so easy to get smarter there, right? Like you don't even have to do anything. Like everyone you speak to, an environment like that is incredibly sharp. You've got you know classes that are designed for the topics that you want to learn more about, and from people that are like leading global experts in that field. It just felt like too good to be true, and I think that level of comfort freaked us out a little bit. We were like, okay, this is life is
Okay.
this is too good to be true, right?
Mm.
We want to we've always try to put ourselves in the deep end. And I think, like, as kids even, there's no reason why we needed to spend like dozens of hours a week trying to build something. I think we could have just we could have just played video
That.
games.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. I think, but it is something that I think we've done. In retrospect, I feel like is it's probably like a trait that I'm sure the founders have as well, right? So yeah,
Mm.
like just I think personally, like putting ourselves like in uncomfortable situations is just natural. And then even at the company, right? Like the way that you build the culture is that I think the way to do that is just to be like radically candid. And so, like, we have very radically candid conversation, and it goes both ways, right? If someone thinks that I'm being silly and irrational, they'll just tell me to my face, and it can be like, people that are three levels below me, right, in terms of like a reporting structure, right, and that's and like I mean, we all absolutely love that, right? It's a ego-free, radically candid environment that we try to build, and so that like when you have people that aren't concerned about like politeness, or no, I wouldn't say politeness, wouldn't be polite, but
Yeah.
aren't concerned about like unnecessary like
Showbiz.
truisms around the core point, right? They're more concerned about getting the core point across. Then you just tend to have uncomfortable truths come out like
Yeah.
a lot quicker. So yeah, which is especially difficult when a company is growing, right? When a company is growing, it's very tempting to just sit back and say, "Man, life is good," like,
Yeah.
and like at some point the company will not be growing as fast. Like you're not going to double every month for eternity. We have to
Yeah.
push to do that for as long as possible. And so, yeah, I think it's tempting to take it easy when a company is growing and say, we're
Yeah.
crushing it, right? But I think when you have that like candid environment, uncomfortable truths come out, and it does create like a little bit degree of heartburn. But the at the end of the day, I think when you look back at it, it's like it's better for everybody.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
That's phenomenal, Adit. I think the phrase again, just like being candid, being accepting, like candidly not comfortable, right? Like having that as a characteristic. I think that sums up what almost all entrepreneurs are, because they are almost always willing to put themselves in these uncomfortable shoes, face the challenge, and come on the better side. So I think that's just phenomenal to hear and resonates very strongly with what the podcast stands for. But this has been phenomenal. I think I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I don't know what would be a fitting end, but what I do know is understanding the cores of how you started to become an entrepreneur and what lies ahead. So without going to philosophical nature, if you can perhaps at a fundamental level naturally tell us the eventual motivation, or let's say the purpose, vision, whatnot of building as a founder, and of course building Zepto. If you can break it down for us as we end, I think that would attest to what a founder journey stands for, and how amazing how you're creating such immense gratification value for millions of consumers in the country. So I think if you can end with that, it'd be fantastic.
Sure. So the sort of the real like the real truth about sort of like being a founder and what's motivating and what's next. I think the answer to that would be yeah. I think like the genuine truth is that what's exciting as a founder is just to see like a vision that might not necessarily have been obvious like a couple of months ago just play out in tens of thousands of people's homes every single day, right? And so that's honestly something that we love and we're very excited by. That's something that keeps us going, and more importantly, it's like the idea of just like looking back and feeling good about something that you built. And I think that I don't know if that has existed yet in the Indian ecosystem. I'm glad that there are a few like successful IPOs that have come out there and people can look back. But no one, I don't think anyone in the Indian ecosystem has reached, and there is never an end, but has never reached like the like sunset moment, right? Where you can ride off into the sunset and like look back at what you built and see that it's great. I think that's what honestly motivates us, right? So just like being able to look back 20 years from now, and 20 years from now we'll be 39 years old. So we will be still around, and so what's motivating is like looking back at it 20 years from now and saying we built a business but might not have been intuitive, and we did it right, and it's created a tremendous amount of value for customers, for shareholders, for employees, and that actually just motivates us. Like there's no sort of like to the point this is what we do, and at a certain point, as a founder, you're building big businesses, creating wealth for shareholders and yourselves and employees. At a certain point, at least personally, it just becomes like that becomes like a metric to stop optimizing for, at least personally, right? And so just like to us just becomes like this is exciting, and let's keep building it, and we're learning a lot along the way. That's a very simple like the very simple reality to that. And in terms of like where we think this business will be, look, I think this is a new category. I think there's a lot more potential here than meets the eye, and in terms of like how this category can evolve into this space, into multiple other spaces, and what this means, right? I think there's a sense that even if it's not horizontal, or even if it is horizontal, or if it's just sort of going deeper into a handful of categories, I think this business, just like the philosophy of it, right, which is increasing frequency and reducing friction, that's a philosophy that I think we can take into multiple different business verticals, and that we're excited by it. I think like it's the current objective right now is to have like touch a household like multiple times a week, right? And like with the product that you built, and then how do you eventually expand that? So the North Star for us is how many times are we impacting and sort of touching somebody's life and adding value to them, and how do we just keep increasing that frequency, whether that's going deeper into the category or looking at how to evolve this philosophy into multiple other categories. So I know it might not be like the quote bread and bones answer. There are a lot of bread and bones conversations that we have, but like the overall 10-year like thought process for the business is that let's just build a business that is like able to like repeatedly add value to somebody's life on a like at a very high frequency. That's like the core of our business. So yeah.
No, I think that's phenomenal. I think that's as candid as it gets, and just goes back to the original motivations of how young, old, medium-aged founders are just building incredible businesses out of the country, and goes back to the core innovation that we're seeing as a ecosystem. And it's amazing what Aadit, you and Team Zepto are being able to accomplish. I'm sure everyone in the audience, everyone watching this will attest to it. And it's amazing how candid you've been in sharing the lessons from building such a phenomenal organization, which I'm sure is only going to go upwards in its trajectory. Thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed it as well as I did. And thanks for being your candid self.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Jivraj, and really appreciate the kind words. And honestly, it was wonderful talking to you as well. Great conversation.
Bye.